The mouth of the cave gaped, a jagged maw against the dying light, as if the earth itself had opened wide to swallow the last remnants of the day. A darkness so profound it seemed to have a texture, a weight that pressed against the world, suffocating the light and swallowing the air. Above, the last sliver of sun bled out, painting the sky in hues of bruised violet and blood orange, a final, desperate display before surrendering to the night. The air, thick with the smell of damp earth and something ancient, turned sharply colder, as if the very breath of the cave heralded the coming night, whispering secrets of the past. 3 figures stood silhouetted against the fading light. Daniel, seasoned explorer, his face etched with the lines of countless expeditions, each wrinkle a story of survival and discovery. Samantha, young and eager, her eyes bright with a mix of fear and exhilaration, her heart pounding with the thrill of the unknown. And Mark, their guide, a man born and raised in the shadow of these mountains, his face an unreadable mask, concealing the wisdom and wariness of a lifetime spent in these treacherous terrains. They stood on the precipice, poised between the known world and the abyss that awaited, a step away from the mysteries that lay hidden in the darkness. "This is it," Mark's voice, a low rumble that seemed to echo the murmurings of the cave itself. The Cave of Whispers, a place where legends are born and fears are realized. The beam of Daniel's flashlight cut through the oppressive darkness, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Momentarily illuminating the rough-hewn walls of the cave, the light revealed ancient markings, almost like forgotten runes. The air hung heavy, thick with the weight of millennia, as if the cave itself was breathing, alive with history. The silence was broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water, each drop an echoing toxin in the vast emptiness, a reminder of the cave's timeless patience. Samantha shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her, trying to ward off the chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. The darkness seemed to press in, suffocating, a living entity that wrapped around them, whispering secrets of the deep. They moved deeper into the cave, the path treacherous, strewn with loose rocks and slick with moisture, each step a careful negotiation with the unknown. The air grew colder, the smell of damp earth intensifying, laced with a metallic tang that sent a shiver down Samantha's spine, making her feel as if the cave was watching her. She could hear her own breath, shallow and rapid, echoing strangely in the confined space, amplifying her growing sense of unease. "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" Samantha's voice trembled, barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. Her voice, barely a whisper, seemed to hang in the air, mingling with the cave's own murmurs. Mark, his face illuminated by the beam of his own flashlight, turned back, his eyes unreadable in the shifting shadows, as if he too felt the cave's gaze. "The mountain, she has many eyes," he said, his voice a low murmur, almost as if he was afraid the mountain might hear. The passage narrowed, forcing them to move single file, their flashlights casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air grew thick, almost viscous, making it hard to breathe. And then Samantha heard it, a low rumbling sound, like the sigh of some colossal beast. It seemed to emanate from the very depths of the cave, vibrating through the rock, through her bones. What was that? Her voice, sharp with fear, echoed in the confined space. Daniel, his face pale in the beam of his flashlight, stopped, listening intently. "I don't know," he murmured, his voice tight, "but I don't like it." The sound came again, closer this time, a deep guttural rasp. The cave seemed to contract around them, the air growing thick and heavy, almost impossible to breathe. Samantha felt a surge of primal fear, a certainty that they were not alone in the darkness. They pressed on, their pace quickening, driven by a growing sense of dread. The passage twisted and turned, a labyrinthine maze that seemed to stretch endlessly before them, and then they rounded a bend and the way ahead was blocked. A wall of solid rock, cold and unyielding, barred their path. They were trapped. "No," Samantha whispered, her voice choked with panic. "No, no, no." Daniel ran his hand over the rough surface of the rock, his face grim. "It's no use," he said, his voice tight. "We're walled in." The rumbling sound echoed again, closer now, vibrating through the rock, through their bones. It was no longer a sigh, but a growl, deep and menacing. The cave was alive and it was closing in on them. Section 5. The darkness stirs. Panic clawed at Samantha's throat. The air was thick, suffocating, the darkness pressing in on them, a living, breathing entity. She could feel the fear, raw and primal, emanating from Mark and Daniel, their faces pale masks in the shifting shadows. The rumbling grew louder, shaking the very foundations of the cave. "We need to find another way out," Daniel's voice, strained but calm. He was trying to sound in control, but Samantha could hear the tremor of fear beneath his words. They searched frantically for another passage, another way out of the suffocating darkness, but there was nothing. Just the cold, unyielding rock and the ever-growing sense of dread. The rumbling was now a constant roar, echoing through the cave, shaking them to their core. The darkness was alive, and it was hungry. Section 6. A glimmer of hope, extinguished. Suddenly a faint light flickered in the distance. Hope, fragile and flickering, flared in Samantha's chest. "Look!" she cried, pointing. "A light!" They stumbled towards it, their hearts pounding with a desperate hope. As they drew closer, the light grew stronger, revealing a narrow fissure in the rock face. It wasn't much, but it was a way out, a way to escape the suffocating darkness of the cave. But as they reached the fissure, the rumbling reached a deafening crescendo, and the ground beneath their feet shuddered violently. The fissure, their only hope of escape, slammed shut, sealing their fate. The light from the outside world, their only beacon of hope, was extinguished. Section 7. The cave claims its due. The darkness was absolute now, all-consuming. Samantha could feel it pressing in on her, suffocating her, stealing her breath. The rumbling had subsided, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of their hearts. She could feel Mark and Daniel beside her, their bodies trembling with fear. They huddled together, three small souls adrift in an ocean of darkness, waiting for the inevitable. The cave had them now, held them in its cold, unyielding embrace. Time lost all meaning. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock an agonizing reminder of their dwindling air supply. Samantha closed her eyes, trying to shut out the suffocating darkness, the crushing weight of the mountain above them. Section 8. No escape. A low guttural growl, close now, sent a fresh wave of terror through Samantha. She opened her eyes, but the darkness was absolute. She could hear it, though, the rasp of its breath, the scrape of its claws on the rock. It was circling them, toying with them, savoring their fear. She felt a scream rising in her throat, but she choked it back, knowing it was futile. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The cave had them now, and there was no escape. The darkness shifted, and she felt a cold, fetid breath on her face. It was close now, close enough to touch. She could smell its putrid stench, feel the heat of its body radiating against her skin. Section 9. An unsettling truth, then silence. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, a palpable tension that seemed to seep from the very walls of the cave. The creature, whatever it was, had retreated back into the darkness. Its presence, however, lingered like a shadow that refused to be dispelled. But Samantha knew it was still there, lurking just beyond the reach of her senses, waiting. She could feel its eyes on her, a silent predator biding its time. They were trapped, not only within the confines of the cave, but within this endless moment of terror. Every breath was a struggle, every heartbeat a reminder of their dire situation. As her senses sharpened in the darkness, a horrifying realization dawned on Samantha. The cave was not just a shelter. It was a living entity, aware of their presence. The breathing, the growls, they seemed to come from all around them, echoing off the walls in a symphony of dread. The scraping sounds, they weren't coming from a single creature. It was as if the cave itself was alive, shifting and moving in the darkness. They were coming from the cave itself. The walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, a dark heartbeat that resonated through the stone. The Cave of Whispers was alive, and they were trapped inside its belly. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the cave was speaking to them, taunting them. The darkness pressed in, a suffocating blanket of despair. It was a living, breathing entity, wrapping around them, squeezing the hope from their hearts. Samantha knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that they would never see the light of day again. The cave had become their prison, their final resting place. The cave had claimed them, and it would not relinquish its grip. It was a predator, and they were its prey, caught in a web of darkness and despair. The darkness had become their tomb. The cave, with its living walls and whispering shadows, had sealed their fate.